All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, verse by verse, book by book, and chapter by chapter study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Luke chapter 4, and we're sort of taking a little time just to examine how Jesus was, how he defeated the temptation of Satan. He was driven in the wilderness after being baptized, and then he was he was and I guess from God's perspective, then he was driven in the wilderness to prove, okay, God had just made the proclamation, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. So he makes this declaration, and now he he kind of drives Jesus into the excuse me, he drives Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. And again, the idea of this was from God's perspective. There's two ways of looking at temptation. And in some translations will say use the word test instead of temptation. They will use the word test or to test. So for example, some translations we say indicates when God commanded Abraham to offer up Isaac his son, it says, and the Lord tested Abraham. So that's the difference. In fact, let me do this. Let me go to James, and I think James, forgot to, here we go. James, I think I want James chapter 1. And okay. Look at verse 12. This is excuse me, James chapter 1, verse 12. And he says, a man who endures trials is blessed because when he passes the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. No one undergoing a trial should say, I am being tempted by God. For God is not tempted by evil, and he himself doesn't tempt anyone. So James kind of gives us a clear picture of how when we go through our test, what kind of perspective here is going on. That God is not tempting you or testing you. God is not trying to seduce or entice you into sin. So when Satan is tempting you, that is the perspective that he is trying to seduce you, entice you to fall into sin. And notice he says, so when you're going through this is not God testing you. Verse 14, but each person is tempted when he is drawn away and enticed by his own evil desires. And after desire has conceived, gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. So in this case, when Jesus is being tempted by the devil, as he is called here, which means the accuser of the brethren, Satan means adversary, then he is, now from Satan's perspective, he is trying to entice Jesus to sin. God's perspective is he's demonstrating, he's proving that Jesus is his who he said Jesus is, the Son of God, the Messiah. All right, so I'm going to, I'll start at verse 1 again and pick it up. Then Jesus returned from the Jordan, full of the Holy Spirit, and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days to be tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and when they were over, he was hungry. And the devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell the stone to become bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, man should not live by bread alone." So, one of the first things we said here is that notice Satan's tactic. And I kind of last time went to the Garden of Eden and showed you how the same tactic here, the same method of temptation, he hasn't changed from that. So he tried to seduce or tried to tempt by appealing to pride. Now there is some issue or question too as to, did Satan know fully that Jesus was God? You know, and um and because there's a couple of ways of looking at this. If Satan really thought that Jesus was God, well, and then on, and not just, let's say, even like a man. In other words, did he have full recognition? Because he's trying. If I'm inclined to believe not fully, because he wouldn't certainly ask Jesus and say, "If you are the Son of God," to try to prove him to do something, knowing that he is God. We will see later that there would be demons that would recognize Jesus as the Son of God. So anyway, he says, "If you are the Son of God," and this is how Satan tempted Adam. Did God really say you will be like God? And of course, Adam foolishly sinned. And here you see Jesus saying to the question. Now, he doesn't even answer the question. I think the question is lame. If you are the Son of God. Well, God just said I was the Son of God. Besides Jesus knowing fully who he is. So the question, if you are the Son of God, he just said I was. So then he says, tell the stone to be made bread. So why does he have to prove that? Now, humans, sinful humans, such as we are, we fall for this foolishness. But notice Jesus responded, but Jesus answered him, "It is written, man must not live on bread alone." Kind of interesting that, again, he just doesn't really answer the whole thing is, well, I am the Son of God. Wait a minute. Who do you think you, wait a minute, I am. Notice, he doesn't have to prove who he is. In fact, he's getting ready to already prove it. Besides the fact God has already proven it. But man should not live by bread alone. And it's kind of interesting that he quotes scripture. Let's see, Deuteronomy 8 is what he's quoting. Then he says, so he took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, I will give you their splendor and all this authority because it has been given over to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. If you then will worship me, all will be yours. Now again, it's sort of another silly thing, because if he's the Son of God, he already owns it. In fact, Colossians tells us that all things were created by Jesus and for Jesus. Okay? So, but, and let me also say this, and of course too, that Jesus here is acting as the Son of God, the Son of Man. Okay? And I think, so when Satan asks him this, I'm convinced that he's not fully cognitive of the depths that he is dealing with God manifested in the flesh. But he's dealing with a man, and obviously he's dealing with a very special man that he's trying to entice him. Now, it is interesting that he says that all these kingdoms, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and then he says, in a moment of time. And so, how did Satan do that? We're not necessarily told. For example, the kingdoms of the world, the primary kingdom of the world would have been the Roman Empire at this time. They ruled the world, as we would say, the known world. Now, he did say that, he said, this authority, the devil said to him, I will give you their splendor and all of this authority. And then he says, because it hath been given over to me. Now, how did he get this? Through Adam. Adam was the ruler of the world. God placed Adam as the ruler of the world. And so, let's go to one of the most famous scriptures that I think will illustrate this. Ephesians chapter 6. Look at verse 10. He says, finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the tactics of the devil. For, and this is important, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the world powers of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. Now, so we see here, and as well as many other scriptures, how we see that there is a kingdom of evil. Satan is the ruler of the world. Okay, Satan is the ruler of the world. In fact, let me go back to Ephesians chapter 2. All right. And look at verse 1 again. It says, and you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you previously walked according to the ways of this world, according to the ruler who exercised authority over the lower heavens, the spirit now working in the disobedience. So again, you see Satan's kingdom and how it operates. There is a theology out there that you will hear from time to time, and talks about spiritual warfare. And the spiritual warfare that I am referring to, not the biblical warfare we just read, but there is a theology that now you have people going around pretending that they are fighting against the spiritual forces of Satan. And sometimes you see these foolish statements such as, Satan, I want to cast you back to hell, or things like that. That's not what he's talking about right here, that you don't do hand-to-hand combat with the devil or demons. And again, the more you see of that, the more that you see of that, the more show. Again, a lot of these kind of ministries, they just put on a show, which they make it seem like they're doing something that you're not. Right? A lot of people walk out in the same way that they walk in. Okay, Satan has not, their lives have not changed one bit. Okay, so again, and then again, we miss how Satan operates. And notice, he hasn't changed from this. How does he corral the world? Now, we see that he's declared as the ruler of this world, of the dark forces. We see that he corrals people, okay, that he corrals people into the ungodly ways. So we see that. So the question is, how does he, how? See, we see here, notice, we walked and you were dead in trespasses and sin. That's, first of all, you start with that whom he controls are those who are dead in trespasses and sins. And then he says, in which you previously walked. And how this word walked is that your direction is ordered. It's set, and then you march or you walk according to, he says, the ways of this world. And then the ways of the world are what? Ordered by, according to the ruler who exercised authority over the lower heavens. And then he says the Spirit now working in the disobedient. So that's how Satan rules. That's what he's doing. What you don't see is, Satan showing up like in the movies, right? You ever see these movies about demon possession and spiritual, all that? They, of course, Hollywood movies always make it seem like Satan is so powerful that he can't be defeated. Especially when you see him with the Catholic priests. He just slaps them around, right? In some cases, he just laugh at them. I compel you by the power of Christ. He just laughs at them, right? Of course, that's fantasy. That's fiction. In reality, you don't see Satan just kind of showing up, like the Ghostbusters and tearing up the place. Okay, if you ever saw the Ghostbusters, you know what I mean. That if Satan really could do that, don't you think he would? Don't you think he would just kind of just manifest and just start tearing up the place? So that kind of tells you that he doesn't have the power that people sometimes boast in. That he really doesn't have the power. He doesn't really have the power that people will say he has. Okay? He doesn't have that power. Now, he is the ruler. So you see that the sphere of his rulership. Then you have principalities, powers. You have a whole structure. And then how does he kind of manipulate the world? Look at verse 3 right here. We too all previously, now he's talking to believers, right? You previously lived among them in our fleshly desires, carrying out the inclinations of our flesh and thoughts, and were by nature children under wrath, as the others were also. So in other words, where Satan rules, now he does have power. He does, like, for example, I'll just say, like, when you think about the book of Job, and in the book of Job, you know what? Let me do this here right quick. Let me quickly go to the book of Job, and I'll just. Here we go. Job chapter 1. All right, look at verse 6. And this, so we just got an introduction to Job, and I'm gonna go by that. I'm gonna skip past that. It says, one day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with him. The Lord asked Satan, where have you come from? From roaming through the earth, Satan answered him, and walking around on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil. Satan answered, the Lord? Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owned? And you have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike him, and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord told him. Everything he owns is in your power. However, you must not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now, here's what I want you to see about this story right here, because we can really get into a lot of questions. Like, why did God hand Job over to Satan, right? What I wanted to show you something now is if you were there and you're living around Job, Job is enjoying life, and what you would see is this. You wouldn't see, in a sense, Satan himself. But all right, he says, I think I'm frozen. Anyway, verse 13. One day when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, the messenger came to Job and reported, while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing nearby, the Sabaeans swooped down and took them away. Okay, and they struck down the servants with the sword, and I have long to come to tell you. He was still speaking while another messenger came and reported, a lightning storm struck from heaven. It burned up the sheep and the servants and devoured them, and I alone have come to tell you. Now, I want to see just right here, those two, because they kind of follow suits with the rest of Job's attack, his atrocities that hits one after another. And that kind of tells you right there how unusual it was that just one after another came. I want you to see behind the scenes, however, because what motivated then the men to come and to steal his goods right here? Okay, his donkeys and all that. What motivated them to take that? That's what I want you to kind of notice. All of a sudden, here they are, never bothered Job before, and all of a sudden they get a thought. They get a thought, and next thing you know, here they come and they take. Notice this: a lightning storm struck from heaven. It burned up the sheep. So then you have this lightning storm, and particularly destroyed Job's sheep. And I want you to see, so the power in the sense that he does have, for example, that in some way he was able to manipulate the weather so that it struck. Okay, it struck Job. Now, the couple of things as I want to close out here. The couple of things here. One, is God doing that today, handing us over to Satan for this kind of testing? The answer is no, because we have clear instructions on how to do that. For example, Peter tells us, resist the devil. In this case, Job could not resist the devil. He didn't have a choice. Peter tells us, resist the devil. Even James tells us to resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And then secondly, no, Satan cannot just operate to his full potential. Even there you saw God telling Satan, do not harm Job. And then you will note, if you go on and read the story, Satan does not harm Job. Yes, Satan is still under God's control. He is ruling not under by him, but he is certainly hindered from doing what he really wanted to do. You don't think that if with all of the evil and hatred in Satan's heart, that he would just destroy the earth, destroy God's creatures, mankind, if he could? So what's stopping him from doing that? And the answer is God. Okay, so but I wanted you to see that. So again, if you were just living around in Job, you just would have been like, man, did you hear what happened to Job? Wow, man, he just got wiped out. You wouldn't have saw behind the scenes that we got the revelation behind the scenes, how Satan was the one that was doing that. How Satan manipulated, how Satan corralled all of these different bands of people that should destroy Job's life. Okay, all right, we'll pick up more on this in the next study. And don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.